If we can program AI to not look at simply what historical qualities, because then AI is only going to choose more of the same of what it's had. But if we can program the AI to really look more broadly at what are the qualities, not the historical qualities that make for great hires, then AI is one of the tools that great companies can use to not just hire the best men out there, but the best humans out there. Right. So for me, I see an incredible potential with AI there in the hiring space to remove some of that bias, but that requires the people who are programming the AI to take into account that the data that the AI is processing right now and analyzing right now and using right now is already biased.
Welcome to the AI Grapple podcast. My name is Kate vanderVoort, founder and CEO of Social Mediology and the AI Success Lab. On today's episode, I am speaking with Dr Alessandra Wall, psychologist turned leadership coach and founder of Noteworthy. Alessandra works with high-achieving women in tech, helping them avoid burnout and step into leadership on their own terms. We dive into the gender gap in AI and tech, why being the only woman in the room is still far too common, and how systems aren't built for the kind of impact women are trying to make at the top. Alessandra unpacks how AI could reduce bias in hiring, lighten the mental load at home, and give women the edge they need to thrive in work and life. If you've ever wondered how AI could actually work for women, this conversation is for you. Welcome to the podcast, Alessandra. It's fabulous to have you here.
It is likewise fabulous to be here with you.
Now, you have had an incredible career spanning psychology, leadership coaching, and working with women in tech. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. But can you share some key moments that have led you to where you are today? Give us a bit of background.
Yes, I can do that. I'm thinking I'll try to share them as key moments. So the very first moment that led me to where I am today is that I was a child with ADHD. I know you probably didn't expect me to go that far back, but it explains a lot, and I'm sure it will tie into our conversation because I'm somebody who had to work 5 times, 10 times as hard as everybody else to get the same results, outcomes, and response. There are advantages to that, learning to work hard and plow through, but understanding that sense of grappling and feeling challenges part of is one of the things that led me to become a psychologist. In my first career, I started as a child psychologist. I moved on to working with adults once I had my own children. It was just not as fun to do play therapy and then come home and have to sit with small children. I know you understand that. You're just still young. And after a few years, I fell out of love with my career. But I didn't fall out of love with the process, with the tools, with the kind of work I was doing. It's just the way I was applying that skill set. So over a period of many years, including a period of burnout in those many years, I built the business that I now have, where, believe it or not, I leverage all the skills, including the child therapist skills. And today I have the incredible, and it truly is, these aren't just words, I have the incredible privilege of working with women who likewise, and not necessarily because they had ADD or ADHD, have a track record of working 3 to 4 times as hard as everybody else to get all the way to the top of their careers. And our job is to make sure, the analogy I've given lately is to make sure that they don't replicate what happened to the president of New Zealand and with the former president of New Zealand. What I mean there is to have these women work so hard to get to the top because they want to make an impact, because they're mission driven, because there's a statement there, and find that once that they're on the top, it's too much. The system isn't set up for them, or the reward isn't aligned, or they have a fabulous title, but they don't have the authority to actually create the changes that they wanted to make in that space. So that is what I do every single day. We look at making sure that they can continue being massively successful, that we define what that success looks like on their terms and not simply on the terms of the system within which they operate. And that we marry that with whatever they need to feel fulfilled. I want my women to walk into work loving work. That's why I changed my career, because I was not loving walking into work. But at the end of the day, I also want them to not wake up thinking about work, go to sleep thinking about work. I want them to have a life. I want them to have a love life. I want them to take care of themselves. I want them to have fun. And that's how I spend most of my days.
You're clearly very passionate about it. And I love how your career morphed as your life morphed. And I think the best entrepreneurs and the best leaders, I guess, their career often changes as their life experience changes. But it sounds like it's all come back full circle for you. So I know you work closely with a lot of women in tech, including some of those who are helping to shape AI at the moment. What are the biggest sort of barriers that you see that are preventing more women from entering or leading in this space? And what are some of the consequences that you're seeing in terms of that imbalance?
From entering, I actually was just having a conversation about this 2 days ago. And it wasn't women in tech that I was speaking to. It was women in finance, but it's the same issue. There's an entry problem that starts very, very early that starts with representation. It's a catch-22. Young women, young girls, pre-university aren't seeing enough women in these spaces, so they're not even considering these jobs as opportunities. And then when they do, the very few that are in the courses, that are taking the certifications, that are walking into these roles, find themselves incredibly isolated. It takes a certain kind of person to be okay with being the only or one of the few, day in, day out, in what is ultimately a really cutthroat and competitive environment. So there is, first of all, this lack of, I would say, an incoming body of women who are shown how incredible this work can be. And then those who do come, we see massive attrition. And the higher we go to the top, that issue I was talking about with our president from New Zealand, that is something we see a lot at higher levels of leadership. So women climb up, they get there, a few, and they burn out, or they leave, or they go into consulting and work for themselves because the systems that they're within don't work for them, because they are the experts in the room, and yet they still have to prove and back up and repeat themselves to be heard. And it's exhausting.
So how do we combat that? I think AI in a lot of ways gives us some opportunities to level the playing field, but in the context of what you've just said, I'm not sure AI actually makes a difference.
I think it does. I think it does.
I'd love to hear how.
You and I, Kate, were just talking about how I co-chair a committee on allyship, and we recently had an event on women and gender bias within AI. And one of the key principles of AI or any real system is garbage in equals garbage out, right? So that's when we think about the shortcomings of AI in this context. The biggest shortcoming is if AI is only using data based on the historical narrative, the historical information, then we're going to continue getting garbage out. But where I see an incredible opportunity for AI is in two places. One, in recruiting and hiring. If you show a resume of you create a resume or a CV, and you change the name on that CV. One CV, you put a male's name. Another CV, you put a female's name. Another CV, you put an ethnic name of any kind, right? That having a woman's name or an ethnic name immediately downgrades the value of the CV. Hiring managers don't look at it. But if we can program AI to not look at simply what historical qualities, because then AI is only going to choose more of the same of what it's had. But if we can program the AI to really look more broadly at what are the qualities, not the historical qualities that make for great hires, then AI is one of the tools that great companies can use to not just hire the best men out there, but the best humans out there. Right. So for me, I see an incredible potential with AI there in the hiring space to remove some of that bias, but that requires the people who are programming the AI to take into account that the data that the AI is processing right now and analyzing right now and using right now is already biased. My understanding from talking to the experts is that can be done.
And it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of the early case studies around AI and recruitment were that the AI was, as you say, perpetuating the biases that have been, that we've been dealing with for decades. But it's always struck me, surely in the programming and training of this AI, we can actually get it to do the opposite, that we can actually tell it where to not put its attention with things like gender and diversity, and that people are hired for their skills and their experience, not for other attributes.
So this is what these experts were saying. They're saying once initially you set up the AI, it's like developing any other learning program. You have a set of hypotheses as to what's necessary for a system, for a class, for a group of people to learn something, and you feed that. But then you get data, you get feedback. And with that feedback, you can start looking at where the bias exists. And then you can, as the way they were explaining is, you can really have the AI look at, what are the qualities that get women hired? The women who are really successful in these fields, and make sure we're starting to pull up the data from that and that gets incorporated. So there is a way in systems where people choose to create the best AI that's actually going to do the job, not just AI that's going to sell, to program this in and to eradicate the bias. And we're seeing people take note of this. It's just about making that shift. Of course, I think it's easier to make that shift and to advocate for making that shift when the people in the room currently developing the AI have a lens for this kind of allyship and the value of having this diversity. But that is one place. And then the other place where I see a huge opportunity for AI and removing that barrier has to do with mental load. Remember how I said earlier, the thing is, still today, women work, these are numbers I'm pulling out, but we are still in a place where women have to prove themselves. There's enough data on that. You and I stand on stage versus our male counterparts. We're all equally educated, equally well-spoken. We have the same talking points, and we still have to prove ourselves. Whereas mixed audience across genders will tend to just listen to the men and take what they're saying at face value. It can be really exhausting to have to do that. AI might not be able to help us with that piece, but AI can simplify all the other tasks that we have to do in the background. So remove some of the burden and the burnout from the work we're doing when we're not trying to influence, trying to speak, trying to engage people face to face. I think about it in my own job. I create an incredible amount of content. I have hundreds of articles that I've written, thousands of posts at this point. The ideas tend to replicate themselves. I've spent years, actually since 2015, you and I go back to using social media for the same amount of time, right? I could go back. I've kept every single thing I've written. I can now take those same ideas, train the AI to look at my voice now and say, can you take this idea and rewrite it and save me probably 70% of time thinking about how to reword something. Then I can look at what AI produces and then I can massage it and refine it and actually make it true to my voice. It's incredible. Like the amount of time it frees.
It's funny. I had this conversation with somebody just this morning, and they said to me, does this free up a lot of time? Like, are you only working 2 or 3 days a week? And I'm like, no, I'm working more than ever. But I'm making more of an impact than I've ever been able to, because I'm the kind of personality that I'm using the technology to do a whole lot more than I would have done otherwise, as opposed to go, oh, I'm going to outsource myself to AI and sit on the beach drinking Mai Tais. But one of the other things that you said there that really resonates for me is around that mental load.
That idea of having AI help remove the mental load outside of the office at home, to me, is incredibly pertinent. And it's interesting because I'm really in my infancy of understanding AI. I think I'm like most people. I think AI, I think ChatGPT, maybe I think DeepSeek right now, or NVIDIA is very basic. I think AI, I think copy, writing, editing, again, super, super basic. But when the rest of us get properly educated, when we become AI literate, I know people who already are doing such incredible things. Let's just talk at the back end of business and what it can look like in the front end of our day-to-day lives. But people who are taking, for example, a coaching video, feeding it into AI. One bot does something, feeds that data into another bot that does something else, that does something else, that does something else. And I can see the possibilities for that, for freeing a lot of time in the office, but also at home. I look at home and I think of all the ways we use AI at home. Certainly, I am constantly looking at, I've programmed my chat. I think that's what takes the most time in the beginning, programming your AI, working with your AI, having conversations with AI so that you're not getting a generic, boring piece of feedback that doesn't represent what you need or who you are. But we're asking all kinds of things. I was seated in my car with my 16-year-old son today, and he was in the driver's side waiting to pass his driving test. And he said, how do we turn on the brights in this car? And I know how to do it when I'm driving, but I'm not. And I said, well, you're supposed to pull this, and it's not working. I'm like, no, you need to pull this and it's not working. And I didn't want to get out of the car to manipulate it. So I pulled out my AI. On a 2018 BMW 530e, how do you da, 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 da? Because if I Google that, I'm not going to get the right answer. And I can have this whole conversation that's going to save him, like, me time and him peace of mind. Right? Eventually, we will have those integrations of being able to feed in something so that they know that the cat feeder is low and that that's going to require connecting with somebody else to make something happen. I mean, I am about to leave on a trip, and I laughed the other day, Kate, watching my husband coordinate with my sons, his mother, our former nanny, all the things that have to happen when I'm not there. And I think when you leave, I don't coordinate any of this stuff. It just continues happening. Right? But to have AI come in and be able to pull that information and say, Luca has volleyball practice at this day, Reese has his football practice, soccer football practice at this day, there's a doctor's appointment at here, here's what needs to happen, here's your table based on your work schedule, Leon. Here are the gaps where you need to make sure you need to secure other rides. By the way, the cat's food is going to go out during that period of time. We should order that now. Eventually we'll be able to use AI and those integrations to free us up. And for me as a woman, and I will say for the executive women I work with who, when they go on business trips, when they go networking in the evenings, are still responsible for running their households from far away, this will allow us to show up in our careers more fully and be more present, and to come home and not have resentment that we're cleaning dishes and we're doing things and we're ordering dinner, even though there are fully competent other people in the household to do that. I mean, the potential is there.
The other thing you've touched on there, which I find really interesting, is how we process information as well. And again, not to do too much stereotyping, but I know that a lot of women tend to process by talking. And so now this technology can actually act as a thought partner that we can talk to, which is really different than how we might have historically had to process our thoughts and get them down on paper or put them into a structure that works for the system that we're working within. I mean, I drop my kids off at school and it's about a 12 and a half minute drive home. I turn on my mate Chatty, or Chatty G as I call him on a good day, and we talk all the way home. And by the time I get back to my desk, I've got blog posts written and strategies and the brief of a lead magnet to send to a designer. And, it just helps me to process in ways that I could never do. If I had to sit down and do that work, it would take so much more time. So I think one of the beauties about this multimodal capability that we now have with video and audio and that interactivity, I think for women, that actually allows us to show up in ways that we might not have been able to otherwise as well.
That's a really good point. It's actually something I don't do yet that I was nearly going to shit all over myself. That I'd like to do more of. I have a client who does that. She's a brilliant engineer. She's the only senior female engineer in her firm, and she does that all the time with AI. She's like, I had this thing, I couldn't talk to you, so I sat there and I asked whatever she's using, let's just say chat, because it's the most commonly known one. I think it's going to become the Kleenex for our AI. And we figured that the best way to address this was this other thing. And that could be scary as a coach, because she just basically used her AI to start problem solving things that we could solve for me as a coach, except that I don't have the ability to be everywhere all the time. Actually, I teach my clients that you make yourself a commodity when you show up for everybody all the time, everywhere, and you exhaust yourself, and it just creates resentment, right? All relationships are I love comparing things to romantic relationships. It's like being in a romantic relationship where you're giving, 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 and your partner's never giving back, right? It's it's a breeding ground for resentment. But by doing that, by the time she comes into a conversation with me, instead of pulling her out of crisis mode, we're at a place where we can do a much deeper level of processing. As a psychologist, I cannot imagine, I'm sure the American Psychological Association and other groups are both loving AI and terrified of AI. I have my sons were thinking about jobs. My husband's an anesthesiologist or an anesthetist, as they say, in the rest of the world. And we talk to them about their future, and we're like, this will probably be able to be done by bots or AI later on. I wouldn't consider, even my husband will say a lot of this, eventually, once you have the bots that can properly intubate, all that can be AI driven. It's easy to feel very scared and I think there's spaces to feel scared, right? We're going to have to rethink how people work, but AI doesn't have to make us obsolete.
One of the early custom GPTs that we built for a client, she's a psychologist, and we built these custom GPTs for each of her clients that wanted to participate, where she trained it in her frameworks and philosophies and ways of doing things, but she also gave it the goals and some of the context of the client so that they could chat to the custom GPT in between. So they could press a button that's like, I'm about to explode at my husband, and it would say, oh, remember what we talked about? Why don't you go for a walk around the block, or go ahead, explode at your husband. It'll make you feel better, whatever the conversation was. But it's really interesting now to see some of these therapeutic AI platforms coming out that are doing the same thing, which is providing some of that continuity, I guess, in between coaching or therapy sessions, because you're rarely in crisis or need the immediate help in a session. It's generally in between. So have you seen some of that technology emerging in your practice?
I have. Actually, we had the TEDx Women. It was called TEDx Moxie San Diego last summer. So, or August. And one of the speakers is a founder who has technology that does that. Now she's using the technology right now for coaching. My guess is part of that is a liability issue and a red tape issue, but it is the same. And she talks about, what did she talk about? Emotionally empathetic AI. And she and I sparred, which is what I love about somebody like that. I could come and I say, I understand what you're saying. I don't like your wording. And I said, I don't like your wording because the whole thing with empathy is if we distinguish between sympathy, empathy, and compassion, sympathy is, that sucks for you. Empathy is, I get it. And that sucks. And compassion is, I get it. That sucks. Let's fix this. Right? So the idea of empathy requires personal experience. You can code something. There's no way the AI has a personal experience, but the AI is very much capable of fantastic sympathy. And with the sympathy, the ability to relate. During the pandemic here, there are lots of folks who were in rural areas who did not have access to care. I mean, they wouldn't on a normal outside of a pandemic, but in a pandemic, especially with the inability to connect to drive. I used to have a friend who would drive 2 hours to go see his therapist. He lived in rural Wyoming. He would drive all the way into Colorado to go see a therapist and drive back. That's a 5-hour therapy session when you think about it with the drives. Having this AI properly coded, properly programmed is about providing the needs that people have, addressing the needs people have, and really relieving a system that is so overtaxed. I don't think it replaces it, but I can tell you one of the things that drove me out of being a therapist was when my oldest son was about 2.5 or 3. My youngest son at that point was 6 months to 1, depending on where we are in the year. And being on the phone at the end, like at midnight, with an emergency room physician and my patient, trying to coordinate getting them admitted because they had incredibly severe suicidal ideation, and going, I can't. I don't want to. In my 20s, I would have been 100% in, but I need to get up in 5 hours and nurse this child and get this child up for school and be turned on for my therapy patients, right? For a whole new day and I'm not saying that the AI could process the hospital admission, but there are a whole bunch of folks who wake up at 3 a.m. very anxious, very sad, struggling with something, who could use that same kind of interaction that you're describing in your ride home, right? We look at, and sometimes I get scared, the use of AI in coaching. But for day-to-day small interactions, I'm trying to write this email to this person. They're driving me nuts. I need to be polite, yet sound powerful without triggering them. This is the wording I'd like to use unfiltered. Can you please correct it for me? Right? I do that right now with my clients. Sometimes they'll send me things and say, can you read over this? And I'll look at it and I'll go, I know what you're trying to say. I'm reading it with a completely different tone on purpose. I would recommend we change these things, right? And we do that, but AI could help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because at the time of us having this conversation, ChatGPT 4.5 has just launched. And in their launch announcement, they're talking about the EQ of 4.5 and how it's intuitive and it understands human needs and human intent in ways that AI hasn't to date. And I haven't yet had a chance to get in and see what that means, but it will certainly be interesting to see how they interpret the coding of emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So, Alessandra, outside of, say, the tech industry, AI can seem like a really intimidating space for women. You know, there's a bit of a misconception that you have to be a prompt engineer and you've got to have STEM experience and you need some kind of degree. So, what are some of the practical ways that women in particular can leverage AI developments to accelerate their career and to stay competitive in what is a very rapidly changing job market?
Oh, I'm going to take a minute to think about that. Beyond what we've talked about right now, one of the big places outside of just being in those fields is simply this idea for me again, and I'm sorry if I'm being redundant, but this idea that it can really simplify our work. It's a huge edge. Actually, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get a little inundated and overwhelmed with all the AI talk at times, but that is all everybody and anybody is interested in right now. So being able to walk into any field, finance, medicine, marketing, psychology, coaching, any of these spaces and say, I have a clear understanding of how to leverage this. We can bring this in. It can simplify our systems. We can remove the burden from our teams. It's a huge, as a leader, to have an understanding and an adoption of AI and to bring that into your team so that you can streamline the processes of your team, especially on these lean teams or when in companies that go through a lot of layoffs, is incredible. But again, the average person is like me. We're using like the baby version of AI. So to have anybody in any field come in with some kind of certification, like further understanding of how to integrate them, who can then articulate that value to a team, to an employer, to a client, it's an incredible edge.
Yeah, the glib way that everybody's saying it is AI is not going to replace you, but a person with AI skills is going to replace you. And I prefer to have a little bit more of a human view on that. But I say, particularly to women, you have an immense amount, if you're an expert or a leader in your field, you have an immense amount of expertise and wisdom that you bring to the table. So bring all of that and then look at how you can bring AI in and actually be one of the leaders that supports other people through this transition, because we are at the moment at this big inflection point. And it's going to be a bumpy ride. People will lose their jobs. People will have very mixed feelings towards AI. And I think we all have a role to play. And, women who can really embrace the technology and use it to propel and accelerate their career, I think will actually do very well through this time.
I agree. And you said something which sparked a thought, which is adjacent to something we talked about earlier, but think about the value as a leader of programming a bot that understands your core values in leadership, your approach, your objectives, where you have taken the time to, I use the word educate. I don't know if it's the right word, but whatever, train, educate your AI about the people on your team and how you work. And the freedom that that gives you when you're not around, if your team has access to that same bot, the freedom for them to ask simple questions, to get a perspective, to say how we're running into this issue. How would Kate handle it? What would Kate tell me right now? What are the top 3 things that Kate would want me to ask in this meeting? She can't be there. I mean, it is really incredible. And one of the things that really strikes me with bringing this skill set to women, I'm going to draw a parallel with parkour. So when I was 37, 10 years ago, I realized that a lot of what sounded like strategically sound decisions that I were making were actually fear-based. And a lot of them were crouched around fear of failure. So I'd always have these contingency plans. Well, if this doesn't work, I can go back to being a therapist. If this doesn't work, I can go do this. So I set an intention that year to act despite fear. And every time I would find something that made me anxious, I would say, if I wasn't anxious, right, assuming it wasn't a true danger, what would I do? And I would adopt that behavioral pattern despite feeling the anxiety. And one of the things I picked up was parkour. Now, when most people think parkour, they think of those 20-year-olds, off in Greece, jumping off of those beautiful white buildings with the blue domes, with the Red Bull labeling and the electronica, the bass going in the background. And the truth is parkour.
Yep, that's what I'm picturing.
Yeah, parkour is still very much a young man's sport. Not just, there are plenty of parkour over 50 groups. There are more and more women's groups, but I went and found a group here in San Diego that did that. And it was intimidating. Not only was I a woman, I was 37. Like, that's hella old to pick up parkour. 37 means 37 years of injuring my body, a way more cautious, fully developed frontal lobe that told me all the terrible things that could happen if I fell. Vestibular system is very different, but it was fun. And so I pushed myself and I had this goal. The men I was training with, the young men, and there were a few men my age that I was training with, would ask me why women didn't come. How can we get more women? And I said, there is no point in evolution where it was safe for a woman to approach a group of men with their testosterone levels high, who are like hooting and hollering and just like big. Like, that's just not safe. Even if we don't know what's not leading us to that, evolution says danger, danger, run away, Will Robinson, or Willow Robinson in this case. I said, if you want more women and girls to engage in the sport, you need to have women and girls moving with you. You need to slow down. You need to stop trying to do all the flips and start the basics. And I remember we would train young girls, and I would see these young men try to train the girls, and boys approach things a certain way. Boys see another boy do something cool and they're like, well, he did that. I should be able to do that. Like, and if I can't do that, I suck. So I'm going to have to try to do that, even if I'm scared. Girls see somebody do something really cool. And somewhere in our development, usually around middle school, so 12, 13, like, we go, oh, that's so cool. I can't do that. There is no way I could do that. And so we just sit and watch. But if you break down the movement for girls, this is where being a child psychologist was awfully useful. If you slow down and you break down the movement for girls and you teach them how to learn every single movement, and then they realize that their body is physically capable of this thing, then you've unleashed a positive monster. Like, it is incredible what they push themselves to do. I feel like AI is very similar. It's this boys space right now. It's super cool, but like, we have a lot of women who are entering into the space going, I'm really confused. I'm not entirely sure how it works. I'm not entirely sure what it does. I'm not finding somebody who's talking about it in terms or a language that works for me. So I'm going to learn what I can right and left. I might ask for some things, but they're not diving in deep. We need more women teaching women how not just to use AI, but to master it, like to really dive deep in it. I think there's an incredible opportunity there for women in any field to develop that depth, that of expertise, and then to go into their businesses, their offices, and say, I'm going to teach. I'm going to teach other people within this organization how to use this to our benefit.
Yeah, that's all I do all day, every day. It's the culture change that's required in these companies to start to embrace the technology. And then the very next thing is the education so that people feel confident in how to use the technology. And it's not just women who are finding it intimidating. You know, anyone over sort of 40 is finding it incredibly intimidating. And then it's interesting because you look at the younger people who are adopting it, but they actually don't have a lot of the business wisdom that's required to ensure that it's being adopted in ethical, responsible, safe ways. So it's a very interesting dynamic at the moment when you look at any workplace, just at the different audiences that are trying to master the skills at the moment.
It's also interesting to consider how AI is being used. You know, I'm sure you'll have these conversations with your children, but I'm constantly having conversations with my children about not using AI to do the work for them. I'm like, you cannot use AI to translate. I'm bilingual. I was born and raised I was born and raised around the world, but I have a French mother of Italian origin. So I'm a multinational, multilingual, and I made the mistake of only speaking to my children in English. So they try to translate a lot using AI, and I'm like, that's not speaking a language. Or I'll look at text and I'll go, you didn't write that. And I know because you have not developed the writing skills to write that. I was listening to somebody talk about how foreign national university students use AI versus American university students use AI. And the distinction that was made was foreign national university students use AI to supplement their work. And a lot of the American national children are using AI to do their work. So they're not developing the skill set. Right? That's, I think, is also a really big place to look at AI and to understand where there's a potential negative impact is it's such an incredible technology. But if it's going to replace our ability to think, those are the people who are going to get replaced by AI. It's the ones who are not going to develop the critical thinking skills. It's the ones who aren't going to read the book, but are going to ask AI to summarize King Lear or for whom the bell tolls or any of those books instead of actually reading them and developing that.
I get asked all the time, is AI going to make us smarter or is it going to make us dumber? And my answer is always, well, it depends on how you use it. And if you actually use it to help you do things that you're not that good at, and then to critically analyze and learn from the process, I learn an enormous amount by using, with the deep research tools that are available now. It is blowing my mind, the depth of information that I now have access to, an analysis that I would have needed a research team to do the analysis before I could start to even begin to comprehend it. But now I can actually drive that research team. And I think, that's our own individual responsibility, is how we're going to use the technology. I have a custom GPT for my kids that helps them with their homework, but it's trained to never give them the answer, but to coach them through a problem or a question. And it does it in a way that uses netball and dance and acrobatics in all of the analogies, because that's what my children love to do. And so math problems are crafted in, half the netball team sitting on this side and half the netball team sitting on that side, and, it does fractions in netball metaphors. So the potential for AI in education, that's a whole another conversation that we often have on the podcast, but it's certainly exciting times. So Alessandra, as we start to wrap up, when you're thinking about, you've talked a bit about how people are responding to AI with fear. How can we start to reframe that conversation? How are you approaching that, particularly in your work with female leaders? How do we reframe that conversation and help people move forward in a way where they feel empowered, I guess, to use the technology?
In the work I do, and it's not just the work I do, it's literally been my approach to not navigate this shift, this monumental shift with fear myself. The biggest positive opportunity I've used is really thinking about how this can help me. If we can show people how AI can help them, to me, that's going to be the thing that makes them less fearful. I know the analogy is overused, but it's not a bad one, right? There was a time where we just rode on the back of horses. And then there was a time when the buggy was invented and people were using buggies. And there was a time when the buggy became obsolete. And I'm sure a whole bunch of people were looking at cars and thinking that they were very dangerous and which I guess they are, but very dangerous and they were going to remove livelihood. But the advent of the car actually brought in a whole other set of industries and opportunities. For those industries and opportunities to be able to thrive, for people to be willing to use them, the people who were most afraid needed to understand how these vehicles could be helpful. So when I see people be afraid, to me, it's always this conversation about, well, let's put that aside. I love the Terminator series too. I am a huge sci-fi fan. Ex Machina, I can see it, I see all of it. And I am prone to the same anxiety. But here and now, we're not there. My T2 has not been delivered to my step, through Amazon via Google order. What I want to understand is, what can I do with this now? How can we use this to build your edge? When I hear you, Kate, talk about all the bots that you have created and programmed, that's what I'm talking about. I use it at such a basic level. So many of us use it at such a basic level. So we're either using it at a level where it's like, this is nice, but we're being told this is going to replace me. Oh my goodness, I'm completely obsolete. Or we can have somebody like you come in and show us how really, truly to leverage this technology to amplify us, not to replace us, but to make us more available in different spaces. Small example. I have a client, this is part of the reason I'm traveling to London, who is hopeful that we can bring some of my programs into the corporate banking space for sustainable finance. But I am, for all intents and purposes, even though I have a small team, a one-woman show. These big corporate banks they have massive global footprints. There is no way I can meet the demand within all of their branches or all of their headquarters across all banks. But if we could program AI properly with my models, with my methodology, if we could train people to release that properly, we can bring what I do, which I think is massively impactful. I know is massively impactful. At a global scale. Suddenly AI isn't there to replace me. AI is there to bring me into more spaces.
Yeah, and platforms like HeyGen, your AI avatar can already attend 1,000 meetings on your behalf all at the same time and put forward your thoughts and bring back a report from those meetings. So, the ability for you to be doing something in one time zone in your way, but actually have that in real time translated and represented in other places is not far off. So it's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Alessandra, for your time today. How would you like people to find you if they'd like to connect?
There are a couple things. One is I am easy to find on LinkedIn, and I post very often there. So that is a great place to start. The other thing, I would say the website. I mean, most of what I do is on the website, but if we want up-to-date thoughts and up-to-date conversations, that's probably LinkedIn, and it's at Dr. So Dr. Alessandra Wall. And then speaking of AI, I just completed a white paper on we call it the butterfly effect. So the small shift that we can make to help women ascend and grow professionally. Initially, I used AI. This is a 2.0 version of a white paper I wrote a few years ago with 100 more interviews in it. And we used AI to get updated data. The AI that I used initially was very specific. I'm like, I need updated data. I need it to be factual. I need it to be quotable. And I want the citations. And it gave me probably over a third of the data points it gave me, it just invented. And I know because I fact checked every single piece and it was like, oh, I'm really sorry. We just thought that this was something that might have appeared in this publication around this time, but I can't find it. But that's another great resource that I'd love to share with your community in terms of talking about how we bring this and how we get more women in spaces where they can then disseminate this.
Wonderful. We'll be sure to share all of those links definitely in the show notes. And I look forward to reading that white paper too.
I look forward to having
the new deep research tools within at the moment. Well, it's just come out in ChatGPT in the Plus account. I've been using it in the Pro account for a couple of weeks, but if you get a chance to run your white paper through that.
I ran my white paper through chat eventually. I mean, I won't lie, Kate, I was so excited the first day. I'm like, this saved me weeks of work, to then be so angry when I saw them. I'm like,
not in deep research though. Deep research is a different technology, and that the hallucination rate is virtually zero.
Right. When we had to go do that, we had to just run everything and fact check everything and get the proper citations. It's out. And I do have the paid version of ChatGPT, the pro version. So I'm going to go look at that. And I'm actually really excited to have future conversations with you about what you're working on, because you ask how we get people to not be afraid of AI. We need more of you. We need people doing what you're doing to help us all understand how to leverage this to show up more powerfully, have more impact, and create that breathing room I was talking about at the beginning for that deep fulfillment.
Thank you, Alessandra. It's been wonderful speaking with you today, and I definitely look forward to another conversation in the future to see how this has all unfolded.
Me too.
Thank you for tuning in to the AI Grapple. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. We would love to hear your thoughts, so reach out with any questions or comments about the show. Until next time, keep grappling with AI and stay curious.